Good evening, buonasera, and welcome to tonight's talk, The Fearless Ulysses of the Divine Comedy, or why the world is still celebrating Dante's work 700 years after his death. Before we begin, I would like to thank the Consulate of Italy in Adelaide, South Australia, and particularly Consul Adriano Stendardo for organising this event in this 2021 Italian Language Week in the world. I'd also like to say, before we begin on this mad flight of ours, if you will, that we would like to acknowledge the Ghana people as the custodians of the land and water of the Adelaide region from which we speak today. We pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and respect the Ghana people's cultural, spiritual, physical and emotional connection to their stolen land and waters, and to their community. Now, without further ado, I will hand you over to tonight's speaker, Dr. Luciana D'Arcangeli.
Good evening, buonasera. When I was asked to do this talk, it was a while back, and I was asked to explain who Dante Alighieri was and why he is still important today. So I thought long and hard about this because I am not a Dante specialist. I am actually a specialist of contemporary Italy. And so I decided to take this challenge on as an amateur, in the real sense of the word, a lover of Dante and his works, and try and convey to you this love and hopefully why Dante is still so important 700 years after his death, not only to Italians, but I believe to our world culture. And so I would like to celebrate him with you. And at the same time, I should be celebrating the 50th anniversary of Italian in South Australia and at Flinders University. However, as you might have heard, there is talk of perhaps closing Italian. We will not know until the 25th, and until then, I choose to celebrate. So, Dante Alighieri, he was born in 1265 in Florence, a Florence that was prior to the Renaissance and to many of the things that we love when we go and visit Florence today. However, it was already a wonderful and very busy, very important city. And Dante wore many hats, even though we always see him with the laurels and the red hat. He was a politician, he was obviously a writer, and for trying to be above the two parties in Florence, he was eventually exiled. And he chose not to retract what he did, even though it cost him, his family, his children, and to live outside, exiled from his much beloved Florence and from his family. So, why is he so important? Well, many people talk of Dante as the father of the Italian language. Yet we know that Italian was already spoken. It was the vulgar language, vulgar as in belonging to the people, the volgo, the people. And so why is he the father? Well, he thought that this language that belonged to the people had the capability, the eloquence of being used instead of Latin. He knew Latin, of course. He read Latin, and we see this throughout his work. Yet he loved and chose this other language, Italian. He created some very beautiful neologism. The Commedia, the Divine Comedy, is full of his neologism. this language that he created, that he molded for his use. So, what is the commedia, the divine comedy? The divine adjective was added later by Boccaccio, who was the first amateur of Dante, and he read the Divine Comedy in Florence, in fact. Well, this work is basically the travels of Dante himself, who's lost the way in life, and he tries to regain it. He tries to find a way towards the righteous path. And the only way he seems to be able to do it is to go down through hell, all the way down. And Dante envisages a hell to be upside down, so like a funnel upside down, where you have the lightest sinners at the top, and then as we go down, the sins become more and more heinous. And he goes through this with a guide, Virgil, the Roman poet who wrote the Aeneid. And in the canto that we will read, he will have him as a guide. So, there we are. So Dante goes through hell, right through the bottom, and hell is situated underneath Jerusalem. So he goes down into to the middle of the earth, and then via a very, very small and tortuous path, he comes out to the other side and finds himself on the shore of the mountain of Purgatory. And so we have an upside down at this point funnel, which is the mountain. Again, it circles, and this time it circles up. And here we have the sinners who need to work through their sins, who need to gain the entrance into paradise. And paradise is further up. They're the spheres of the heavens. So Dante created a whole geography for us, and he goes through it representing us. So Dante is every man and no man. He is every one of us, and in fact he's a nobody, even though there is a slight arrogance because he is the one who writes this guide to, in a way, salvation for us. So this fantastical voyage, if you want, into the world of sin and the world of purgatory and the world and the heavens, sound very fantastical, but they were very, very real to Dante, who struggled to mediate his readings and his knowledge with what was going on around him. And Roberto Benigni, who has toured Italy reading Dante and his Commedia and explaining it to the large public, talks about the Commedia as being full of pathos, full of these incredibly strong emotions that draw us in, that never leave us. And he compares it to Shakespeare and says that Shakespeare only achieves this amount of pathos in Macbeth for the duration of the play, while Dante manages to keep us glued to the pages throughout. And certainly that is the feeling that most readers get from the Inferno, hell, because Dante places in hell many of the people he knew personally, and some of the people who actually he wanted placed in hell, and I'm sure you can relate, just like I can. And then he again meets other people who are expiating their sins in purgatory, where the emotions are lighter because, well, they will get to salvation eventually, though people in hell will not. And then there is this opening of the heavens. And yes, most people find it perhaps a little harder because you have to delve a little deeper into the knowledge of the 1200s, the 1300s, his times, and how the heavens were governed according to their knowledge. However, you can leave all that behind and just be enraptured by the beauty of heaven and the words and the images that Dante conjures for us. But today, we're going to stay well rooted in hell. In fact, down the very bottom of hell. We are going to be in with the fraudsters. That's where Ulysses it belongs. He belongs there because he is not only the ideator behind the Trojan horse, and we still use the word for Trojan for viruses that are carried into your computer by nice bright shiny things, and we are that we're led to believe will be good for us or beautiful or interesting, but they carry a virus. So the Trojan horse is still with us, very much alive today. He's also again not the ideator, not just the frauding counselor, but also the person, the agent, who will steal the palladium, which was believed to keep the Trojan walls intact, so defend the city from the attackers. And he's also the one who manages to find where Achilles is hiding and bringing into war. So those are the three main sins that keep Ulysses in hell. And he is not alone. He is there with Diomed or Diomedes, who carried out these feats with him. But even though he's in hell, Ulysses, after all, he is in the Iliad and he is in the Odyssey. So there is a stature to the man. There is a gravitas to the character that the man Dante, the poet Dante, the new poet, meets, together with Virgil, who is his guide. So Dante makes his way through hell with the help of Virgil, his guide, the master of reason. Reason can only take him so far, and so once he goes through hell, up through purgatory, he will eventually have to hand him over to another guide that impersonates faith. Because, as I said, reason can only take man so far in Dante's world. So I will leave you in the capable hands of our reader tonight. You've met him already, Duncan Rosso Vecchiarelli, who will read to you Clive James's translation of the 26th canto, an excerpt of the 26th canto, where Virgil and Dante encounter the flames that envelop Ulysses and Diomed together. Just a word before we do. They are there enveloped in the flames because Dante thinks for every kind of sin he has a contrappasso, he has a special way for his sinners to pay for their sins. And because Ulysses has been fraudulent, in particular with the use of his reason and his tongue, then he is enveloped in a tongue of flames. So there's two flames that walk about. They are in this very dark hell, and they look like, all these sinners look like fireflies in a field in the dark. So here we are for a reading of Clive James's translation of the Divine Comedy.
I stood there on the bridge above the cleft, grasping a rock as I stretched out to sea. For sure I would have fallen in had I not held on. And then my leader, seeing me look so intent, said, "All these flames are what false counsellors must wear and be burned by." "Master," I said, "I'm sure now, having heard you speak of what I guessed. Already I wanted to ask, before you said a word, about that fire, divided at its peak, as if it were the pyre of those two sons of Oedipus who killed each other. Speak of who is in there. Are there two? Which ones?" He answered, "Two are punished there inside. Ulysses is in there, and Diomed. In vengeance now, together they are tied as once in wrath. They groan for pain and dread within the flame, and for the clever plan of the gift horse that opened up the gate for the noble seed from which great Rome began to first burst forth, and in that fiery state they rue their craft by which Deidamia gave them Achilles, and they feel the heat for what they stole from Troy and took so far the stricken city sought its own defeat, Pallas Athena's image. There they are, the thieves of the Palladium, in there. If they can speak," I told my guide, "I pray, if they can speak inside these lights they share, this light, I pray that you might let me stay. May it avail 1,000 times this prayer, until that flame with double horn comes near. You see, I bend towards it with desire." And he, "Your prayer deserves praise, never fear, and therefore I will grant what you require, but guard your tongue. I'll be the one to speak. I understood what you would like to know, and they might scorn your language. They were Greek." After the flame had reached the time and place my guide thought fitting, thus he spoke to it. "You that are two within one fiery space, if while I lived you ever thought me fit to be respected when I wrote of you, if I was worthy of you, whether much or little, when I did my best to do you justice with my heightened lines, let such devotion from me sway you to stand still, while one of you tells me where, when he was lost, he went to die." Hearing my master's will, the larger of the flaming horns was tossed, and murmured as if by the wind misled. Its point waved to and fro, as if it were a tongue that spoke, a voice thrown out, that said, "When I left Circe, having lived with her more than a year in Italy, before Aeneas got there, no love for my son, no duty to my father, and what's more, no love I owed Penelope, the one who would have been most glad, could overcome me in the passion that I had, to gain experience of the world, and know the sum of virtue, pleasure, wisdom, vice, and pain. Once more I set out upon the open sea, with just one ship, crewed by my loyal men, the stalwart who had not abandoned me. As far as Spain I saw both shores, and then Morocco, and Sardinia, and those numberless islands that the sea surrounds. But men grow old and slow as the time goes. And so did we, and so we reached the bounds of voyaging, that narrow outlet marked by Hercules, so nobody should sail beyond, and anybody thus embarked knows by those pillars he is sure to fail. Seville on my right hand, I left behind Ceuta on my left. Brothers, I said, dangers uncounted and of every kind fit to make other sailors die of dread you have come through, and you have reached the west, and now our senses fade, their vigil ends. They ask to do the easy thing, and rest. But in the brief time that remains, my friends, would you deny yourselves experience of the unpeopled world we'll find if we follow the sun out into the immense unknown? Remember now your pedigree. You were not born to live as brutes. Virtue and knowledge are your guiding lights. I gave with these words such an impulse to my crew for enterprise that I could not, to save my life, have held them back. We flew on oars like wings, our stern in that mad flight towards the morning. Always left we bore. Stars of the other pole we saw at night, and ours so low that from the ocean floor it never once arose. 5 times the light had kindled and then quenched beneath the moon since we first ventured on our lofty task, when we could see a mountain, though not soon could see it clearly. Distance was a mask that made it dim. But it was high, for sure. Higher than anything I'd ever seen. It climbed into the sky. Who could be more elated than we were, had not we been plunged straight away into deep sorrow? For the new land gave rise to a storm that struck our ship's forepart. 3 times the waters led us in a circle. 4th time, out of luck. Stern high, bow low, we went in. Overhead, somebody closed the sea, and we were dead.
Thank you, Duncan, for this wonderful reading. So Dante meets these flames, sees these flames, recognizes the importance of these characters, and we always have these outstanding characters in hell that sort of represent all, or rather the best of the sinners of these various circles of hell. And he wants to know how Ulysses died. Now, Dante has never read the Iliad or the Odyssey. He only knows about Ulysses from the Latins, including Virgil himself, who wrote about Ulysses in his Aeneid. So he wants to know how this hero of old died. Hero and trickster, which one? And tricked, of course, because of course Ulysses or Odysseus is often tricked. Well, Dante wants to know how this man has left Earth. And Ulysses goes on to explain that he did not heed the pull of the Pietà for his father, the wish to see his son, or to go back to his loving wife Penelope. What he went after, what he pursued all the way to his death was knowledge. So the incredible thing that happens is that Dante, not having read, in fact, Homer's stories, creates his own version of Ulysses. And so we see him and we remember him in this mad flight over the ages. And every age has their own version of Ulysses, has their own reading of Dante's Ulysses as well as Homer's. But many times Ulysses becomes the hero, becomes the one who goes after knowledge. And that is the way that very often he is represented in our culture, as the hero, as the one who goes after unexplored horizons. So I would like to remember with you a beautiful lecture that I attended by Piero Boitani, who also wrote a wonderful book, Winged Words, Flight in Poetry and History, which I recommend you read. And what Professor Boitani does is he takes us through an incredible number of references of Dante in our world. So starting way back in the 1300s all the way till today. I mentioned T.S. Eliot in my description, but not only. And let us not forget James Joyce's Ulysses, who in a passage from Ithaca writes about Bloom, who leads Stephen out of the kitchen into the garden backyard and alludes to the emergence out of hell of Dante, and the viewing of the stars at the end of Inferno, which is absolutely beautiful. And here the two men confront the sky. And Joyce writes, "The heaven tree of stars hung with humid night blue fruit." So yes, it's followed by meditations on constellations and planets. And I want to read to you a passage from Ithaca. "Ever he would wander, self-compelled, to the extreme limit of his cometary orbit, beyond the fixed stars and variable suns and telescopic planets, astronomical waifs and strays, to the extreme boundary of space, passing from land to land, among peoples, amid events. Somewhere imperceptibly he would hear, and somehow reluctantly, some compelled, obey the summons of recall. Whence, disappearing from the constellation of the Northern Crown, he would somehow reappear reborn above Delta in the constellation of Cassiopeia, and after incalculable eons of peregrination return an estranged avenger, a wreaker of justice on malefactors, a dark crusader, a sleeper awakened, with financial resources, by supposition, surpassing those of Rothschild or the Silver King." So yes, Ulysses reappears over and over again through the centuries in all sorts of guises. He reappears in Primo Levi's Se questo è un uomo, if this is a man, when Levi is trying to lift himself out of that situation as he is talking to a dishwashing guy. And he talks about Ulysses. We were not made to be brutes. There is more. And of course, Primo Levi was a scientist. But as we said, the sciences are not enough. Rationality is not enough. There is more. There is virtue to being human. So what Professor Boitani does is he reminds us of the fact that Ulysses is very much a mirror image of Dante himself. And Dante is very aware that his fate could be the same as Ulysses, because he dares to go where others have not gone before. He dares to go down into hell and purgatory and to relay to us those experiences, and also the experience of heaven, of paradise. That is an incredible undertaking, as dangerous and as daring as Ulysses, going through the Straits of Gibraltar into the ocean to go and look for undiscovered places. And so Dante is not even allowed to speak, doesn't allow himself to speak to Ulysses. As you heard from Duncan, he begs Virgil to speak to these characters enveloped in these flames. He really wants to know. However, Virgil acts as a spacer between Dante and Ulysses. And he says, they are Greek. They might not understand you. They might not wish to talk to you. But Dante certainly wants to hear what drove Ulysses to his death. And he is given an answer, and it's all very much out of Dante's imagination. Now, many scholars have found hints here and there of how Dante may have put together this version of the story, and they're all really, really interesting. However, I find that the words themselves carry an enormous weight. So you are not made to live like brutes, but to discover knowledge and in virtue. So, and I read from Professor Boitani's book, Dante's Ulysses was to remain an icon for Euro-American culture and literature for all those who would not tolerate limits or dictates. At the beginning of the 20th century, he was still used, by Tennyson's version, for Amundsen, the first to find the Northwest Passage, and for the doomed attempts of Scott and Shackleton to reach the South Pole. And we have seen in the first 2 chapters of the book how his image and story haunted people like Lauro de Bosis, Gabriele D'Annunzio, and Benito Mussolini. Although the figure of Ulysses is inevitably composite, Homer's fascinating protagonist inevitably appearing now and then as fellow traveller, occasionally overtaking Dante's before drawing back for a while, it was with similarly mad flights that the 20th century began on June the 16th, 1904, and ended, he says, on September the 11th, 2001, with a flight into the Twin Towers. So let me just take you back for a second to that beginning, to the similarly mad flight that the 20th century began with on June the 16th, 1904. It was the flight of the Wright brothers on their biplane. And yes, it's a mad flight. I don't know about you, but maybe I would have thought twice about going on that flight with them. But the whole idea of fatti non foste per viver come bruti, you were not created to live like brutes, is that push towards new knowledge, towards creating new experiences, that of course the Wright brothers fall right into. But I'm going to take it one step further, and I'm going to take you to Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, the film. And what I see in this line is the ape that we see in 2001, where he picks up from the ground a large bone and has the first tool. That is the start of humanity. That is the first mad flight, the use of something, the discovery of something, the rediscovery perhaps of something, and the new use of something that is very, very much, I think today, still incredibly important for us. Think of the vaccines that we are now using to defend ourselves against the virus COVID-19. It is very much, that vaccine is just a different, a new version of that first tool. It is a tool to new knowledge. It's a tool to the future. It's a tool to leave behind the brute, if you want, Dante sets aside. We were not made to live like brutes. And in fact, in 2001 Space Odyssey, we have the pilot who takes us into the future, whose name is David Bowman. And again, the Bowman of antiquity is Ulysses. So there is a direct reference there. And he goes out into space, into the beyond. And we have so many popular references. And I want to take you very quickly, and I'm jumping here left, right, and center, but I hope you're still following me, to Star Trek, that made the to boldly go where no one's gone before, their mission for, well, it was for the first series and then beyond. We're still going decades later.
Space, a final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
I'll take our captain, Captain James T. Kirk, who was interpreted by William Shatner. Now, some of you know of my interest in film and my specialization, and take you to really yesterday. Only just a few days ago, William Shatner went into space for a few minutes and on a mad flight. He is 90 after all, so I would deem that a mad flight. He went into space, and there it was only 3 minutes, but you could sense his emotions when he came back down onto the ground to Earth. And he said, "No description can equal this." He said a lot of things, but the other thing that he said, "It's so much larger than me and life." And he was visibly emotional. He was suffering from what Frank White, in his book titled The Overview Effect, Space Exploration and Human Evolution, described as this incredible sensation of people who go to space and see the Earth not with this blue sky and all the things that are known to us, but sees Earth from this the blackness, the darkness of space, and sees what is a very small planet with, the blue water and, the green vegetation and so on, and feels the fragility of life, of all of us, that we're not made to be brutes. And so I want to finish with Dante, who has taken us through hell, through purgatory, through paradise, through salvation. He gives us a possibility. He is every one of us, and in fact no one. And yet he dared greatly in writing. That was his avenue to knowledge, to the conoscenza. That was his avenue to discovery. However, he says it throughout, that it's never enough to have knowledge and virtue. Now, make of virtue what you will, okay? But I would like to remind us all to strive for that exploration, but always paired with virtue, always paired with that understanding that we are everyone, every man, and no man. I would like to leave you with a reading of Dante. I'm not an actor like Duncan, but I think that if you are studying the culture of a nation, if you are studying its literary works, you should also hear what they sound like in the original. Now, I'm not going to read you the whole excerpt, but I am just going to read you Ulysses' words. Quando mi dipartii da Circe, che sottrasse me più d'un anno là presso a Gaeta, prima che sì Enea la nomasse, né dolcezza di figlio, né la pietà del vecchio padre, nel debito amore, lo qual doea Penelope far lieta, vincer potero dentro a me l'ardore chi ebbi a divenir del mondo esperto, e degli vizi umani, e del valore. Ma misi me per l'alto mare aperto, sol con un legno e con quella compagna picciola, da la qual non fui diserto. L'un lito e l'altro vidi infin la Spagna, fin nel Morocco e l'isola di Sardi, e l'altre che quel mare intorno bagna. io e i compagni eravam vecchi e tardi, quando venimmo a quella foce stretta, dove Ercule segnò li suoi riguardi, acciò che l'uom più oltre non si metta. Dalla man destra mi lasciai Sibilia, dall'altra già m'avea lasciata Setta. «O frati», dissi, «che per 100 milia perigli siete giunti all'Occidente, a questa tanto picciola vigilia di nostri sensi che è del rimanente, non vogliate negar l'esperienza di retro al sol del mondo senza gente. Considerate la vostra semenza. Fatti non foste a viver come bruti, ma per seguir virtute e conoscenza. Li miei compagni feci io sì aguti. Con questa orazion picciola al cammino, che appena poscia li avrei ritenuti, e volta nostra poppa nel mattino, dei remi facemmo ali al folle volo, sempre acquistando dal lato mancino. Tutte le stelle già dell'altro polo vedea la notte, e il nostro tanto basso che non surgea fuor del marinsuolo. 5 volte racceso e tante casso lo lume era di sotto dalla luna, poi che entrati eravam nell'alto passo, quando n'apparve una montagna, bruna, per la distanza, e parvemi alta tanto, quanto veduta non avea alcuna. Noi ci rallegrammo, e tosto tornò in pianto, che dalla nova terra un turbo nacque e percosse del legno il primo canto. 3 volte il fe girar con tutte l'acque, alla quarta levar la poppa in suso e la prora ire in giù, come altrui piacque. Infin che il mar fu sovra noi rinchiuso. Thank you for listening. Grazie.